Hey, this is Matt once again. Welcome back to another video. This is another paid request for Eric. Thank you so much for that. I don't know when this will be uploaded, but he sent in a request wanting me to talk about the wrestler Scott Hall. Because unfortunately, this is a guy that recently, for what I understand, forgive me if I have the details wrong, he had fallen, he had broken his hip, he had gone in for a hip surgery replacement program. During it, there was a blood clot. It was dislodged and went into the area of the heart, and he had like 3 heart attacks, just like that. And so he was on life support, and as of this recording, Kevin Nash, who's one of his dearest friends, mentioned that his family was going to take Scott Hall off of life support. And that's that. And that was sad to hear. Now, granted, Scott Hall had his misfortunes. He was not the perfect of a human being. And he had his downfalls. But I do think he was a good entertainer. I think he was a good wrestler. And he's one of those guys I remember way back in the day in terms of wrestling. I remember him more as Razor Ramon. Because Scott Hall here, he began in places like the NWA and the AWA. And even in here, you have some of these matches. American Starship versus Inferno #1 and Inferno #2, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Or the ESPN Championship Wrestling, Scott Hall versus Michael P.S. Hayes. Or ESPN Championship Wrestling 1985, the $100,000 Battle Royal. And there was a bit where he's a tag team partner with Kurt Hennig, who would later be Mr. Perfect. But I think a lot of people, like me, knew him when he got into the WWF. And you see he had matches with Bret Hart, Rick the Model Martel, Shawn Michaels, Diesel, $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, the 1-2-3 Kid, who is Sean Waltman, who would later be X-Pac, and more. And I first heard of him, like I said, growing up with wrestling. I did not have the channels to watch the pay-per-views or to watch when the things happened. All I had as a kid was ABC, CBS, another form of CBS, and PBS. Anything else, it would be stuff taped from my aunt, mainly from my aunt, maybe a few others. And that's how I was able to see X-Files and Simpsons, which were on Fox, because I didn't have Fox. Or I was able to see episodes of other shows. Some bits of Ren and Stimpy from Nickelodeon. Or Doug. Which was very nice of her to do. And one of those things was wrestling. And that's how I heard of Hulk Hogan. And there were videotapes of Hulk Hogan watching his stuff. And in particular, there was one VHS tape that had a bunch of matches from this era around 92, 93, 94, which is called the Next Generation. The New Generation, I guess. Not Star Trek, Next Generation, but the New Generation. This is a time in wrestling where the 80s, very prominent, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man Randy Savage, Jake the Snake Roberts, various other wrestlers. And then you had stuff like the steroid trial, the steroid scandal, Vince McMahon being on trial. Did you supply people with steroids? Did you make people take steroids? Vince McMahon was found not guilty, but there was a chance that he could have gone to jail. And that's when they had to beef up the wellness policy. Now, how much that policy is actually enforced, or maybe there's some people that get away with more than they should, I don't know, but you got away from the Hulk Hogan's. Macho Man Randy Savage was he became more of a commentator. Hulk Hogan pretty much retired, did his bit of Thunder in Paradise TV show, and then went to WCW. Which people forget, when Hulk Hogan first got into WCW, he didn't do well. There was initial buzz, hey, he's battling Ric Flair, but he didn't really do well initially. Until the NWO stuff came about. But in that era, a lot of people, understandably so, would say it wasn't really a great time of wrestling. But sadly, I look fondly back on that. Part of it's nostalgia. But also, even if it's bad, it was definitely memorable. You had bad gimmicks like the Goon, which was a hockey player, but he was a... It would be like if Adam Sandler's character from Happy Gilmore became a wrestler. He's really into hockey, but then he's doing wrestling. You had the Gobbledygooker, the guy in the turkey suit. You had Mantar, a guy in a bison head, for some reason. You had Bastion Booger, who wore like a slim about his stuff and always ate food and was disgusting. It was a bad era for wrestling, but that's how you have people like Bret Hart, Diesel, Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, as well as Scott Hall, who, based on Scarface, and he did say it was based on Scarface, he created the character Razor Ramon. Hello, Chico. This is Razor Ramon. You see these gold chains? You take care of them, or I take care of you. Okay, Chico? And it was those toothpick at the refs, at the opponents. I loved that character. I loved the gold chains. I think the name Razor Ramon was cool. The look, the accent, I thought it worked very well. And he would kind of keep that in WCW. He just couldn't call himself Razor Ramon because Razor Ramon was owned. And in fact, there was a point where Vince McMahon tried to sue him, but it just didn't work out. So while he just called his name Scott Hall, people still thought of him as Razor Ramon. Because he was talked like that. He was talked like Scarface, at least for a bit. Maybe not, after a while. So it was that era that I'm the most familiar with Scott Hall. I liked his promos. I liked the way he sold the promos. I liked his shtick. Because I'm a big fan of Scarface. And I saw this before Scarface. So I watched Scarface. I'm like, oh, he talks like Razor Ramon. Was the other way around. Oh shit, it's Razor Ramon. He stars in this movie. No, not quite. But I loved his finishing move, the Razor's Edge. I loved that he would get his arms out like this and lift the guy up. And then like slant. He gets the guy between his legs. He flips him and then gets him up. So the guy's facing this way, but Razor's lifted the guy up. And then slams his shoulders down. But you just sell the idea that it hits the guy's head, and it feels like a powerful finishing move. And then there's ways to counter it and play with the audience, like he does this, but the guy could flip him over and do this and get the audience excited, but then if the other guy counters, oh man. But whether he was a heel or babyface, if he's adamant, he does this, and then 1, 2, 3. When finishing moves actually mattered. When you didn't kick out of finishing moves 18 times during a match on WWE Raw. Then why the fuck is it called a finishing move? If no one can finish with it. I understand doing that every once in a blue moon, but when you do that every fucking week, then it just becomes tedious. One of the 50,000 reasons why I stopped watching wrestling. But I liked his shtick. Like I said, in that era, he would battle Bret the Hitman Hart, who was the champion at the time, which I love. Bret Hart is in my top 5 favorite wrestlers. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Macho Man Randy Savage, Bret Hart, he's in my top 5. I thought he worked good matches with Scott Hall. Scott Hall would Razor Ramon would also go against Bob Backlund, and there was a time where even though he's a bad guy, people thought he was cool. He was cool with the way he behaved, the way he did promos. He worked well in the ring. He had some of the best punches. Just obviously with wrestling, you can't actually punch someone, otherwise they'd be bruised and bladdered and brattered and battered and fattered and tattered and feathered, and every bit it'd be a Picasso painting with how many times people have to punch someone in various wrestling matches. So you have to fake it, but at the same time you have to make it work. And the way Scott would do the snap of his punches, they looked really good to sell it, and the sound, and he really knew how to do a punch in wrestling. And I liked some of his moves, like he gets the guy and he like throws the guy behind him. I thought it was a cool, different way of doing this. I'm not sure if it's not a sidewalk slam. I forget what kind of slam that's called. And again, he would fight Bret Hart, Bob Backlund, $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, Shawn Michaels. I think he beat Bob Backlund. The most championship-wise he got was the Intercontinental Championship. He got that about 3 times or so in WWF. Because I know at one point he beat the Rick the Model Martel. Because again, people were cheering him. People were like, yeah, this guy's cool. This guy's badass. And so he became a bad guy heel, and they turned him into a face. And of course, you have the upset loss where this jobber, the 1-2-3 kid, surprisingly got a win. And you watch that, people were shocked. People were in awe. People were shock upon shock because this guy was looked at as a jobber. There's no way he should beat Razor Ramon. But it was an upset win. It was the underdog, and people were like, yeah. And Razor Ramon was like, what? The idea this is when he was a heel is no, that didn't count. That doesn't count. And the stories that eventually Razor would be impressed by 1-2-3 kid Sean Waltman and, hey, good job, man, and give respect. And that helped Razor Ramon become even much of a good guy. And then $1 Million Man's like, oh, you got beat by this jobber, you got beat by this guy. And then Razor was the hero, and $1 Million Man was the bad guy, and Razor beat Ted DiBiase, which I think might have been $1 Million Man's last match in WWF. Could be wrong. And then he would battle Rick the Model Martel, and of course the ladder match, WrestleMania 10, with Shawn Michaels. That's probably the match people think of the most. But then he kind of got to a point and he was sort of stuck there. Just stuck there. Where he's won the IC belt, if I stop stuttering, like 3 times. He was never world champion. And it seemed like that would never happen because that was the era where it was either Bret or Shawn. Bret or Shawn. And then Diesel, Vince McMahon likes big guys. Oh, Diesel, he's a big guy, powerhouse guy. Considered one of the worst champions. Although that was because he was a badass, and then when he became champion, they made him a champion that would kiss babies and not be as much of a badass and sing Christmas songs. Because that's what Vince McMahon does. He's a dumbass. And Scott Hall, I understand, I mean, I don't appreciate him and the Clique stuff. The Clique being his group with Shawn Michaels and Triple H and all that stuff where they would screw over people, they would fuck over people, and they would lie and backstab. I don't appreciate that. The backstage politics. I don't appreciate that aspect. And I fully get why people like Jim Cornette don't like the guy. And personal dealings. And then, especially later on where he had his drug habits, he had his drinking habits, and self-destruction, which was sad. I know Scott Hall, years and years before all this, he had. It was self defense. He killed someone, but in self defense. And maybe that was a lot of baggage in his head that led to this stuff or other stuff. I don't know. I mean, yeah, you can watch documentaries and stuff, but I wasn't there, so I don't know for certain. But anyway, at WWF, he was at a standstill and go, okay, well, I need, if this is as much as I need to get paid, and if this is as far as I can go, what do I do? And so he went to WCW. And then Kevin Nash went there as well. And people don't realize how important that truly was. Because then they kind of started this whole thing with contracts. And the wrestlers being able to get paid more. As much as people hate and dislike them, they were a good reason why, a big, huge reason why wrestlers nowadays can get paid a lot more than they did in the past. Contracts and so forth, just, and being a bit more flexible on that matter. And with Eric Bischoff moving WCW to the same night as WWF was, and oh, here are the outsiders. Here's two guys that people saw were two of the big stars at that time, Diesel and Razor Ramon, and they're on this program, and they're acting as if they're invading. You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. Hey yo. Does he would say that like, hey yo. I don't have a toothpick, but. So here we are in WCW. And just, it was the invaders. Hating WCW, we could do whatever we want, and if we're invading, we got baseball bats, and we could do all this stuff, and we wreck your wrestlers, and you know what, we'll form a group of our own called the NWO. And guess what, we actually have a third guy, and that became Hulk Hogan, and that's when, truly, the Monday Night War began. And without Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, you would not have that. Because there would not be an outsider. There would not be an invasion. There would not be people going, wait a minute, I saw these guys in WWF, and wait, is it blending reality and fantasy together? What's real, what's not? What's the truth, what's not the truth? There were people at the time doubting, and people forget how huge that was. Every other person you could find an NWO t-shirt. You still find them wearing it today, the NWO t-shirt. The For Life t-shirts. People still watch it today. They're still wearing that stuff today. And it was huge. And people were more watching that. And they were beating WWF. And WWF was the first time they were getting beaten. And the ratings, that had never happened. And then Vince and them had to up their game. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, all this other stuff. The Attitude Era. And the Monday Night War, that's one of the biggest times of wrestling where even the general public was watching it. Not just the fans of wrestling, but the general pop culture public were invested and curious about what was going on. Which is not the case now. That's why wrestling numbers are so low. They could throw in like AEW, throw in Shaquille O'Neal or whatever the hell, or now WWF is throwing Logan Paul. But that massive appeal where the General Joe and General Jill would pop into the stadium and cause a ruckus, that you watch the crowds in that era, WCW and WWF, completely different from the crowds of today. And you know, that changed fate, that changed wrestling, and changed it from what it was to what it became. And Scott Hall was a big part of that. Now, I didn't mind him in The Outsiders and NWO, but I will be honest, I'm one of those few that liked him better at WWF as Razor Ramon. The reason being, I thought his matches in WCW were just not as impressive. That's just my opinion. Because in WCW, because of the gimmick, because of the NWO, the matches would either end in disqualification, would end with the other NWOs jumping other people, would end with, oh, okay, let me get a baseball bat, let me get a baseball bat, let me get a baseball bat. Not all the time, but a lot of times it's just, I miss just seeing him perform as a wrestler. And because of the more loose regiment, Scott Hall would drink more. It's like, nah, I don't want to wrestle today. Because if you get a guaranteed contract, and that's what I meant when I was talking about the salaries and the contracts, the guaranteed contract. Like, you get paid this no matter what. And having, well, I have to work these amount of days, and I have to work these amount of hours, and it's so much less, but I'm getting paid more. But then people were more free to do stuff, and that led to more self-destruction. Now, the promos were cool, and the stories were cool. Them battling Steen, who was more like the Crow. I still remember the bit where they tried to get Diamond Dallas Page in the NWO. They think DDP's going to join, but then DDP does the Diamond Cutter. I think it was on Scott Hall that he did it on. You know, that was cool. And like in this set, you have... they don't have as many WCW stuff. They have... you know, the Outsiders style Kevin Nash versus Steen and Lex Luger, or versus Harlem Heat, which had Titty Did It Sucker Booker T in it, because he was part of Harlem Heat. Scott Hall versus Scott Steiner, Scott Hall versus Chris Jericho, Scott Hall versus Steen in 1998, the Outsiders versus Goldberg and Sid Vicious, who was Sid Justice in WWF. Scott Hall no, then the others were in when the company got bought, WCW. Soon after, Scott Hall just drank too much. He self-destructed, drinking too much. He couldn't perform much, and then he was kind of... that's why in the later days of WCW, you just did not see much of Scott Hall. Drugs, alcohol overcame him. And then when WCW got bought, Vince McMahon wanted to bring the NWO in because the NWO sold, but barely much happened. Because let's be honest, I mean, Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash were not who they were in WCW. Kevin Nash, he could not do as much because his body was screwed up. Scott Hall had a lot of issues with, again, drugs and alcohol. That was still apparent. He was not the the Razor Ramon physique and wrestling techniques of yesteryear. He just wasn't. That's why, I mean, it's fun to see him fight Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania. Was it WrestleMania 18? It was cool because I like Stone Cold Steve Austin. And Scott Hall, I remember watching Razor Ramon back in the day. For what it is, it's fun. Yeah, a little bit of Kevin Nash doing stuff, but the Scott Hall... if it was the Scott Hall of this era, it would have been a very different and better match. And that was the same WrestleMania. You had Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. And that's what people talked about more. Not as much... and again, the match, I don't even think it's that bad. It's just... it could have been a lot more and a lot better. And he was just not up to his own standards. Not nearly. Which was disappointing. And just, a lot of bad stuff. And I know, thankfully, Diamond Dallas Page helped him out a bit. Same with Jake the Snake Roberts. But, I mean, that takes it, all that stuff in the past took their toll. And it's not just that. It's also wrestling as well. Wrestling will... there's only so many times you land on a mat and all this stuff that your legs and all the other pieces of your body will get screwed up. But I do think the alcohol and drugs did not help matters. I definitely think they had at least a part of a factor of making faster. It was a faster rate of his body breaking down, and it's sad. Again, I don't know him as a person. You hear things about it. I don't really care for his backstage politics. You hear stories about them screwing over people in WCW, like the younger guys cannot get their time to shine. Because these other guys, and that includes Hulk Hogan and others, have their own hands in the cookie jar. But I enjoyed his promos. I enjoyed his his matches in WWF. I like more. I think that was more of his prime. Because he wrestled before, but I liked his Razor Ramon, like his Starface type of gimmick. And again, I just think he had better matches. Because again, you didn't have to rely on baseball bats. You didn't have to rely on everything being disqualification and 13 NWO people jumping in and trying to fight. And there's rarely clean wins and clean losses. And that got old after a while. That's one of the many things that hurt WCW as time went on. Yes, we know it's not UFC real, but it's, number one, it's still real enough that people get hurt and damage their bodies. And number two, people still like winners. They still, whoever they follow, they still want the person to win and consistently win. It's like any type of book story you read to a kid. You want the knight to slay the dragon, not the knight to fight the dragon and then they get disqualified and then we'll come back later. That's the end of the book. And the kid's like, hey, they disqualified. They'll fight another time. Maybe, next 2 weeks later I'll read you another story. And the kid, okay. Well, the dragon, he was ready to give up, but then he blew fire, and that was a disqualification, and the knight went home and shoved the sword up his ass, and then the kid's like, what? And no one won. No one won? Nope. What about the princess? Well, she's still there. She's, knitting. She's, she's gotta wait maybe 2 more weeks. The people get tired of it. When you do it all the time. I keep looking at, this is the Scott Hall DVD. This is the only DVD I can think of that they did on Scott Hall. It is a 3-disc set. Disc 1 is the documentary where you have the life-changing event that was, him having to kill someone in self-defense. Back in Orlando, moving to Florida, AWA experience, Razor Ramon is born, Rumble Superstar, and so forth. And he definitely seems like a guy that knows a bit about wrestling. Like, you watch him talk about matches, he seems like he knows a bit of the psychology of the matches. Wrestling smart, as they say. And he was a good entertainer. And he will be missed. So, rest in peace, Scott Hall. With that said, thanks for watching. Take care. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.